My wife and I were starting our new life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We had both recently graduated with our master's degrees. I secured a job as a teacher, and my wife landed a position at a local hospital. After accumulating thousands of dollars in student debt, all our hard work seemed to have paid off, although the student debt is a horror story for another day. In the final months of summer, we began our move from our old house in Shreveport. Had already shipped most of our belongings to the new house, except for one load we were moving ourselves. We rented a moving truck and decided to travel in the middle of the night, thinking the lighter traffic would make for an easier drive, given my lack of confidence in driving large vehicles. This plan worked well until, with about 2 hours left in our journey, I ran over something that instantly deflated the tire, indicating it was more than just a nail. A few minutes after hanging up, my wife noticed someone behind the truck. Then, we saw another person in front of it, and soon 2 more individuals appeared, a young woman and a man, probably in their 20s. The woman, in a friendly tone, offered to help us change the tire. My wife discreetly texted 911 for help, a possibility I was unaware of. Despite the offer of assistance, something felt off, especially with the large, unsmiling man behind the young woman and the absence of any vehicles that could have brought them there. Declining their offer, I suggested they head to a nearby rest stop. When I dropped a $50 note through the window, which none of them moved to pick up, it confirmed my suspicions. Panic ensued as they attempted to force their way into our vehicle. Fortunately, the arrival of a police officer, alerted by my wife's 911 text, dispersed the group. The officer informed us that we had likely been targeted by a trap designed to puncture tires and make us vulnerable to theft or harm. Reflecting on the incident, it's a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk on seemingly deserted roads at night. Though we didn't pursue legal action, I hope those involved find a better path and don't harm others. This experience was a harrowing introduction to our new life in Baton Rouge, but it hasn't dampened our spirits or our belief in the kindness of strangers, though it has made us more cautious. Declining their offer, I suggested they head to a nearby rest stop. When I dropped a $50 note through the window, which none of them moved to pick up, it confirmed my suspicions. Panic ensued as they attempted to force their way into our vehicle. Fortunately, the arrival of a police officer, alerted by my wife's 911 text, dispersed the group. The officer informed us that we had likely been targeted. I'm curious to know what people think of this story. I ended up in a lot of legal trouble for something I didn't even do at that point in my life. At the time, I just considered that life isn't always fair, but now, more than a decade after that situation, I'm somewhat shocked by how everything happened. I was 19 years old during the fight in the story, and I was young and foolish. I immediately moved out and rented this place on a flexible basis. It was little more than a shack. We had been dating for just a few months and weren't good together, constantly fighting. And as I said, I was young and thought I knew what I was doing. Living with her was a rebellion against my parents, who didn't like this young woman. As soon as we moved in together, we started fighting immediately. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and she would just be staring at me. If anyone has ever seen the movie Paranormal Activity, when the main character stands and stares at their partner for hours, that was exactly what my ex-girlfriend was doing. It was truly scary. I woke up 2 nights in a row with her standing there. When I confronted her, she just replied, "Relax, I'm just watching you." What does that mean? I tried not to worry about it and also tried not to tell my parents that they were right. I was earning minimum wage, she wasn't working, and I couldn't afford my bills, eating, and supporting her. It simply wasn't feasible. And of course, this led to fighting. Finally, I reached my limit after a month and told her I was moving out as soon as the month officially ended. She lost control when I said this, started hitting me in the face as if I were an actual punching bag. I raised my hands and yelled for her to stop. I'm sure the neighbors heard, but in the area where I lived, no one interfered in each other's business. When she finally calmed down, we tried to talk. I was surprised by how well the conversation went, considering our history of past conversations. We agreed to move back to our parents' houses and take things one day at a time. It was a mature conversation, and I started to feel good about it. I made my arrangements and told her I would go home tomorrow morning. I could tell she was upset, but she just nodded and said okay. That night, I woke up to her screaming, the kind of scream you would hear if someone was being murdered. It was my girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend, or whatever she was at that moment. She wasn't in the room, so I ran to the living room and found her next to the front door. I grabbed her shoulder and asked if she was okay. She was sobbing uncontrollably. I reassured and tried to say it was okay while hugging her. She had some keys in her hand and hit me in the head with the keys. I started screaming in pain and frustration, asking what all this was about, and she kept saying she knew. To this day, I have no idea what she knew, but she just kept saying she knew. I kept trying to plead with her to relax when I should have just gotten into my car and left at that moment. What I didn't realize was that before she started screaming, she had already called the police. When I reached out my hand to try to console her, she threw herself on top of me. I basically cradled her in my arms. The police knocked on the door and opened it, sobbing, and immediately handcuffed me. They didn't ask questions or anything. They just told me to step back, raise my hands, and handcuffed me. I didn't know what to do or say and had never had legal trouble before. She kept screaming at me, "This is what you deserve, you bastard." I tried to plead with the police that I had no idea what was happening, and they were being kind of rude, ignoring me, and giving me very little attention. They put me in the back of the car and said they were taking me to the detention center until they could sort out the situation. I called my parents, who got there in minutes, fighting for me. Apparently, she called the police and told them I had assaulted her. Let me just say that there are monsters out there who do this, and everything that happens to those people is deserved, but truly, I never laid a finger on her. She also told the police that it was she who wanted to move out, and when she told me that was when I lost my patience. Fortunately, I had all the text conversations with my parents about going back home, which helped me a lot. I don't know how this is possible, and when I tell this story to people, they also don't understand how it's possible, but I was stuck in this detention center for more than a week. They didn't let me go without evidence or proof. They just kept me there. Some people told me it could be because of the police officers I was dealing with that night, but anyway, this was very disturbing. I finally got out, and within a few days, I received a message from her. I didn't respond and just blocked her number. I ended up winning a lawsuit against them, actually, and my record was cleared, but it took a long time to happen. I had this stain on my name for years. And one last detail about this terrible story, about 4 or 5 years ago, I found out she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Apparently, this is genetic in her family since 2 of her cousins also have the disease. In 2017, I decided to leave my hometown and venture out on my own across the country. My entire family lived in my hometown, and none of my cousins or other relatives had any desire to leave. I wanted to be the one who would change that for my family. Of course, they were upset since my family is very close, but it was time to experience the world outside my own backyard. I moved from a big city in São Paulo to a relatively small town in the countryside. I was very excited to start my life in this little corner of the world. I was told that the city I was moving to had a small but good tourism industry in the summer, but for the most part, it was quiet and picturesque, exactly what I wanted. I visited a few months before moving and met many local residents who seemed to be lovely. The community was so friendly, and it seemed like everyone looked after each other. Finally, the time came, and I moved with my fiancé, Rick. The move was mostly smooth, some arguments, but in the end, everything worked out, and by 6 p.m., we were inside our new home. Unfortunately, the joy of our new home didn't last long. At some point in the middle of the night, I didn't see the exact time, we were awakened by a strange sound, almost like a door slamming. Rick got out of bed to check, and when he came back to the bedroom several minutes later, he said nothing seemed amiss. However, the time he took to check and come back seemed to have been too long. When I asked why it took so long, he said the front door was unlocked, which was not typical for us, but he said with all the excitement of the day, he might have forgotten to lock it. He then spent a few minutes searching the house just to make sure there were no intruders. Fortunately, he found none. Whatever we had heard had already gone. He kissed me and told me not to worry about it, and we went back to bed. That night was tough, I couldn't sleep at all. Call it female intuition or whatever you want, but something deep inside me just didn't feel right. That morning, we had our coffee and continued decorating and organizing our new home. It was around 1 p.m. that we finally got ready to leave the house, and in front of the house, there was a package with a note that said, "Welcome. Enjoy the house." Rick picked up the package and opened it, and inside there was a glass, just a common glass. It looked old, but there was nothing special about it. He laughed and made some jokes about people in this town being weird or something, and I laughed, but mostly I felt a certain discomfort. I just knew something was wrong with that. After the package incident, we went to the store and did all the necessary shopping. Moving is really tiring, and sometimes you don't realize all the things you need until everything is already set up. That night, we had dinner, set up the internet, and watched a movie together. I felt weird and anxious all night. We went to bed around midnight, and shortly after midnight, we heard 3 loud knocks. None of us had fallen asleep yet since we had just laid down in bed. Rick slowly went to the door, and before he could respond, 3 loud knocks echoed through the house again. An elderly woman shouted with difficulty, "Please, I need help. I have an intruder outside, and I'm not safe." My fiancé replied, "All right, just wait. I'll call the police." The woman almost instantly shouted, "No, please, let me in. They are coming after me." Rick looked at her with sympathy but said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, if it's not safe out there, I'm calling the police now. They can help." As if flipping a switch, the elderly woman stopped her erratic behavior and, with a much deeper and almost sinister voice, said, "Open the door now, or I'll end your lives." Rick wasn't kidding and pointed to the door, saying, "What are you doing? Get out of here now." The elderly woman ran to the door like a child, pushed it with all her might, and when she opened it, 2 much younger and bigger men ran inside and began to knock my fiancé to the ground. I remained hidden as best I could in the closet and watched the fight through the slit in the door. I held my breath, hoping the police would arrive at any moment. I could see the men kicking Rick and could hear him coughing and struggling while the elderly woman cheered and laughed. I'm not sure exactly how much time passed, probably just a few moments, but the police lights could be seen through the windows. The 3 intruders ran out the back door as if they knew exactly where the door was. On the way out, the elderly woman grabbed the glass from the package, ran off, and shouted something like a warning or a curse. I don't remember exactly. I was so scared and worried about Rick that everything else was a blur.